Right, so that was a very cool demo. So I think a good way to start the discussion is 10 years ago, I think in June, is the launch of the first iPhone.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a good way to start this discussion of how close are we to the end of the smartphone and the beginning of this next phase, this kind of new interface and the way to interface with technology?
Great question. So you guys just saw a little about what Michael does. I'm Noah, I'm the CEO of Doppler Labs, and we're actually focused on audio augmented reality. So I'm just gonna give them a little context.
Yeah, please.
So we create a product called Hear One. Hear One is the first in your computer. It basically takes the foundation of a headphone and adds a lot of new functionality on top of it. So when you put the product in, and we were playing around with it earlier, it mimics the acoustics of your ears. So it's like having nothing in your ears. But then you can augment the world around it. You can turn the volume of your world up and down. You can add filters that reduce noise or enhance the environments, and you can stream audio on top of that. And we believe, if you kind of think of the film Her, that the future, to answer your question, is going to take computing to a much more human place. And we think that audio and voice is a key part of that. And the reason we're focused on the ears is kind of two reasons. One, we've been wearing technology in our ears for decades, right? And I know one of the things we were talking about backstage is there's a lot of focus on the eyes and there's a lot of focus on the wrist, but we do not have a precursor technology that is kind of the bellwether for that technology, right? You had the typewriter and then the laptop, you had the Symbian phone and then the phone, and we believe that not only from a cultural perspective are people more comfortable putting tech in their ears, we believe that audio has the ability to be a much more elegant way to interface with computers. And to answer your question, we think the mobile phone will be around for the foreseeable future, let's call it the next few years, but we're gonna see more and more technology enter the body, both internally and externally, that will free you from the phone more and more, but that'll be a gradual process.
And Michael, how does virtual reality fit into this future? Is it destined to be just a niche product, or do you think it will go further than that?
Well, I think that the word virtual reality conjures this idea, obviously, of a virtual reality. And I think that if, when you put on a headset, you actually feel like you are in the streets of a Paris or on the surface of Mars or in the patient of your body, like in your patient's body if you're a surgeon, or in an airplane engine that you're repairing if you're a mechanic. I think if you can deliver those experiences and actually make them feel real, then it will be very successful. I think that we're seeing hardware get to the point where that is possible for the first time, and obviously there's billions of dollars being invested in VR and AR. So I think the hardware is there, but what I think is still missing is input that can replicate and create the sense of immersion that has to parallel that. And I think that the current efforts we've seen at controllers just don't do that. And also, I think obviously what has to come after that is content that uses that combination of hardware and input. But I think that we will see over the next 1 to 2 years VR hardware come to market that is able to provide that, like, holy shit, I'm actually sitting here and I feel like I am in this place. And I think if it can do that, it will be a relatively mainstream and very disruptive part of our society and culture.
And how important is what Facebook does with, say, Oculus, in terms of getting this, to be a technology that really captures the imagination and becomes really widespread? And the same question for you with, say, Apple, with the speculation on what they may or may not do with augmented reality and what they've already done with the earphones.
Sure. You want to go first?
Yeah, I think that what happens with technologies like Oculus and such is, it's important, but I think actually that we're kind of already seeing the commoditization of the hardware in VR to the point that the actual building of a VR headset is something that almost any Chinese manufacturer can do, probably. And I think that the real thing that Oculus Rift and now Facebook did, which was very sort of important for the space, but also by definition started this sort of commoditization, was realized that you can take an already mass-produced mobile phone display module and put it in a piece of plastic and have a good VR headset experience. And that now means that almost anyone can build a decent piece of hardware, but obviously having just a display is not a product, so then there's a question of ecosystem and content and obviously input. And we know that there are a lot of large household name companies that are working on either mobile devices that would have their own ARM processors already built in place, or people working on things that connect to PCs like Oculus Rift. And I think what's going to be interesting is how the sort of operating systems, content, and input develop, because I think that's the part of the puzzle that hasn't really been defined yet.
Yeah, and I think for us, Apple releasing the AirPods was a sea change. I think the removal of the headphone jack was equally. It signals to, when a company like Apple signals that the in-ear form factor, that in-ear technology is going to be a big part of their play, obviously people start paying more attention. And for us, one of the things, if you start looking at market research, we were talking about this earlier, is now the predictions is this category is called hearables, that by 2020 it'll be a $40 billion industry. And I believe that it's going to come to fruition a lot faster than AR glasses or VR glasses, and I think the debate about what comes first, I fundamentally believe the ears are going to be part of the zeitgeist a lot quicker than that. And we were talking backstage about how in certain use cases you're going to find that the visual is really powerful, but it's going to be episodic. You're going to have, surgeons or manufacturers or things where having these layers are going to be, really important. I think one of the other things that Apple did is, without throwing them under the bus, let's just say the aesthetics of the AirPods have come under a lot of scrutiny, but they've already started to become mainstream. I see people walking around all the time with AirPods, and that's in itself a cultural, and I'm very interested in how do these things become culturally acceptable on a day-to-day, because I do believe AR is one of the ways we're going to bring technology and humanity closer together if we do it right. But just the fact that people are comfortable with a white stick sticking down their face, walking around, being normal and interacting with people, for us that's a big signal, and we believe in the space of the only other people really pushing the boundaries of kind of what you can do in the ear. And in our technology, we actually have 4 ICs, 4 compute processors in each of your ears, and once you start doing that, you open up the ability for things like real-time language translation and these things that have seemed sci-fi, but we've already built, and it's cool.
And do you foresee people really grabbing on to this technology and getting excited about it, or being like, okay, wait a minute, this is getting all a bit weird. I have a computer on my face, I have one in my ear, I have a hang in front of my eyes. It does raise a question about how much technology we want, and really about how we all interact with each other in this question of humanity and computing and how those interact.
Yeah, I think those are 2 great questions. So first, I think it takes step functions. Like for us, we started with an earplug, and then we made a concept car product that was AR only, and then we launched a flagship. But on a market level, people need to get comfortable with technology. 10 years ago, you brought up the iPhone. It was a phone. It didn't even have an app store. And as more and more functionality came in, like this has become an indispensable piece of technology that I guarantee you, if we were having this talk 15 years ago and you said, people will be walking down the street with their heads in a piece of glass, tapping like this, it would have seemed really odd. But through conditioning and through kind of the socialization of this technology, it's become, but to your point, I actually think your head in a piece of glass is distracting you from humanity. And part of what we're focused on, part of the reason the product is called Here, is we believe you can pick your head back up and use audio as a way to interface both with the world while still getting data. But it will take time. I don't think tomorrow everyone's going to be wearing AR glasses or AR audio products. I think there's step functions that are as important to the cultural adoption as it is, as well as the technological, and they have to go hand in hand.
Yeah, and I also think that the more human the technology is, the more invisible it becomes. And I think you're right that people are going to be reluctant and feel overpowered if they have to deal with lots of different systems that have different modalities and feel like they're just more stuff to think about. But part of the reason we love hands and part of the power of our hands and fingers is that they're already capable for every person of doing these unbelievably complex things that we don't think of oh wow, picking up this cup of coffee is just so hard because I have to maneuver my fingers just so, and there are so many millions of like nerves and muscles moving. I just am like, my brain is just like grab the cup, and then my hand does the rest. And I think that at its best, technology can feel like that, and certainly that's why we're passionate about bringing fingers to it. But I think that at a higher level, I think whether it's like through hearing, whether it's through like visual display, whether it's through fingers, I think that the more human the technology is, the more natural it is, the more it builds on and becomes a part of us. Actually, the less it feels like I have 5 computers on my face, and the more it feels just like I'm doing this thing that for me is just a natural part of my existence.
And how important is getting the operating systems right now? Because you can see the dark side of this, of if we're one day wearing glasses or have an earpiece and your vision and your hearing are polluted with banner ads, spam ads, or in virtual reality, you're walking through your virtual world and Krispy Kreme is offering free virtual donuts. How important is that, and how much work is going into setting the ground rules of what is acceptable and how these technologies are going to be rolled out?
And I'd also love to understand I think we probably have different ideas of what it means to be human. I mean that. Like, for me, virtual, like, the demo was awesome, but anti-gravity, creating boxes out of thin air, as much as that might be a cognitively human, like, it's starting to become more real in the sense that our senses can be tricked into thinking that is more like humanity. At the end of the day, you're wearing a giant thing on your face that fully takes you out of your reality. And so I'd love to, I think that's a really good question. We were like, what does it mean to be human in this digital future? And if you are totally removed from reality, is that still a human experience? And then you get to the questions of, are all you avatars anyway, and what does that mean?
No, these are deep questions, and I think that the part that I think is human in this case are the hands and fingers that are being used to control the thing that, to your point, is not, I guess, explicitly a part of our universe. And there are always questions of, like, obviously one of the things that's attractive about a virtual world is sometimes you get to cheat or like break the laws, and sometimes that's the explicit purpose. If it's a game, like, we're not necessarily sorcerers in real life, but it can feel a lot more immersive and fun to feel like you're a sorcerer with your actual hand, or like as an airplane mechanic, perhaps rather than having to actually go about and like assemble all the parts individually as you would maybe if like they can snap towards you a little bit and you can cheat. Is that human or less human? I think that the application has more freedom to be physical and natural, but also at certain, from a design perspective, in certain ways, better than reality in the virtual reality. But I think that the input still has to be human, because I think that that's what makes it so that people can just instantly figure out, I see my hand, I see my fingers, and without having to think about like, oh, what do I do with these fingers, or which is how you approach the technology with a controller. Just having that instantaneous connection, I think that's the part that's human. But certainly, I think that for VR, you're always going to be wearing this headset, and the purpose of VR at its best should be radical immersion, where you're totally disconnected. And that's not the only future of computing. Certainly, I think that there are places for that, and I think there's a lot of places. But I think there's also a lot of places for totally transparent sunglasses like computers that are all about being present, or even things like ear-based computers where there isn't anything that's a digital display, but perhaps, and not even a world where hands are the only input also, but where things like voice and audio and other things that are all complementary. I think all of those have a role to play too.
Yeah, and I don't know the answer to this either. I spend a lot of time thinking about what does, as people building technology, we are, and most of the people in this room and people in this space, the people at the forefront of defining what this kind of interaction, you keep using interface, but it looks like and how it does tap into our humanity. And I think, we were saying back, you kind of have this Blade Runner future, you have for us this kind of the film Her, where, and that also one thing we didn't touch much on is, the idea of kind of the smart assistant and the idea of this ever-present AI is definitely obviously going to be part of VR and AR. And I think for us, one of the things that's most interesting is if you think about the ear, you can bring an AI with you if you have tech in your ears all the time. And you can actually do it in a way that hopefully does allow you, because you tried the technology. With our technology, you can put the technology in and layer things on top of it. Now, yes, the person you're talking to doesn't know that, so that creates a certain type of barrier, but unlike something like Google Glass, you're able to actually do it in a very seamless way. And in a very culturally sensitive way, right? You're still interacting and talking with the people. And so for us, we think there's really interesting ability to integrate with AIs and make that, I could have a voice literally in my head right now while I'm talking to you, giving me data, maybe giving me information on your background or what Leap Motion's latest thing was or what the crowd, you have this data flow, but you can still be tuned in. That's the terminology, we use music terminology.
Yeah.
And how do you bridge that is a lot of what we think about.
And I mean, a lot of this discussion is essentially around how not to be Google Glass.
Sure.
So 4 years on, why are you, or either of your companies or AR/VR, not going to be just the latest iteration of Google Glass? Why is it going to work? Is it the rise of these voice assistants that are actually useful? Or why is this time different?
Well, for me, I'll answer from the audio perspective, and then I think there's a fundamental difference between the eyes and the ears. You wear glasses, I don't. To get me to put glasses on is a huge leap. Like, I have to wear a shirt, well, because of societal norms, I have to wear a shirt.
You can take it out.
Hey, night is young. But to get me to wear glasses is a leap, right? But to get me, so many people in tech didn't understand why Apple bought Beats, and I'm not going to claim I know it, but Jimmy Iovine is a genius. He got people to wear 6 pounds of red plastic on their head, spend $399 and turn to their friend and be like, if you're not wearing this, you're not cool. Like, that's huge cultural innovation, and all of a sudden, everyone was on the subway. We were talking about New York, rocking Beats. It totally reinvigorated that industry. And so for us, we're really focused on the aesthetics and the social interaction, and we think the ears, again, because of the fact we've worn technology in our ears for so long, and because you can make it less intrusive, and because you can do it in this subtle, elegant way, we think it's a fundamentally different way to enter market than glass. Now, I think AR glasses will come, but again, I think it'll come in these episodic things long before. It'll take a lot for every person in this room to be, we're all wearing glasses and they're all enhancing our worlds. 5 to 10 years at minimum, even if Apple, we saw what happened with Watch, even if they go for it, I don't think it's enough.
Yeah, I think that it's a question of value versus the cost, and for regular consumers, I agree that a lot of the cost is about wearing something, and Google Glass had a high social cost, and
a very high social cost.
Very high social cost, and a low value because the display was small and such, and it did a good job at capturing people's imagination and getting people excited about the idea of what could be possible, but it didn't approach that really. But I think that as AR becomes richer and richer, and I think for example, when we talk about human connection and creating more human connection and more humanity, and I think that you can make an argument certainly that if people are sitting next to each other, that they're less connected if they're wearing glasses, and that's maybe where something like awesome magical earbud computers comes into play. But on the other hand, if I can feel like I'm actually present in AR, and we could be on this, I could be standing over, in my office, and I could see someone as if they were actually there, and they could be my friend, and I could see them as a physical reality of them, that they are on the other side of the world. If you think about how just growing up with friends in like Bangladesh and Australia and China, even just that simple part of one tiny part of what's possible with this technology, the implications that has, I think that there's a lot of value, and I think even if people aren't wearing it 100% of the time immediately, they might put them on when they want to talk to their friend in Bangladesh, for example.
Right. And we're running out of time, but just one last question on privacy. If we've come on leaps and bounds in terms of the technology, what they can do, what they can track, information they can provide, presumably that's what they can do in terms of invasion of privacy is equally high.
Sure.
Do you have any sense of of the regulations? Are people looking at this, or how deeply are the companies thinking about, all right, how are we going to address these issues? Because they're very real.
Yeah, I can't speak on behalf of the big companies, but I'm sure they are all, a lot of them have gotten caught many times with issues in this space. I know for us, privacy is something we take incredibly seriously. We don't record anything, right? There's a lot of things we could do that we don't. But again, as the people creating the technology, there is a responsibility, right? There's a responsibility to ensure that the user base is protected. And I know from our company ethos, that's something, we hired an entire team out of Palantir that basically works on ensuring data is completely secure. But it will be an issue, because AR glasses, you're going to walk through a mall and you're going to get bombarded with, if you walk in a Best Buy in the next 60 seconds, you'll get $10. There's going to be this, and how you create those kind of abilities to control what you want and have those privacy protections is going to be essential.
And is it the same issue in VR? Very quickly, sorry, we're running out of time.
Yeah, I think it is an issue, and I think it's less about VR or AR per se, but it's more about the sensors in this case. And for example, everyone who has a Leap is trusting us to have a camera that it is, could in theory be on. And we've taken a lot of efforts to make it so that our data is only being collected at the level of what's useful for hands and fingers, even though it would make it a lot easier for us to just capture all the data all the time. But we're very sensitive to the idea that people don't want a camera looking at them always, and that's one of the things that separates our approach from how other people approach the space. But I think that as we move into the future, people will be, I think right now there's not an awareness necessarily of all the data capture that's happening. I think that that's changing very quickly though. And I think it's going to be a much more pressing concern on the part of everyday people as we move into this next phase of platforms.
Great. We've gone over a bit on time, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thanks, guys.